Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. I'm your host, Joey Weisler, and today's guest is someone whose work beautifully bridges the worlds between storytelling, design, and healing. Professor Brenda Cowan teaches in the Exhibition and Experience Design program at the Fashion Institute of Technology in Manhattan, and she spent her career exploring how spaces, stories, and objects can support wellness and recovery, especially in the wake of trauma. Her theory of psychotherapeutic object dynamics examines how the things we preserve and present, whether in classrooms or even museums, can really work to facilitate our own healing. From Syrian refugee stories to 9/11 memorials, Brenda's work invites us to ask the question, what do objects remember for us? And this conversation is for anyone thinking about the environments that we create for our students and for ourselves, and even how the smallest details can really work to speak volumes. Brenda, we're so happy you're here with us. Welcome to the show.
Oh, yes, Joey, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted.
Such a
Delighted to
pleasure.
be here.
So Brenda and I actually met because we are colleagues together at the Fashion Institute of Technology, but this program is completely unaffiliated with FIT, yet it's so wonderful to merge two expert minds in the fields and have a
Mm,
great conversation about education.
yes.
So Brenda, I wanted to begin by thinking about the work that you have done with the psychotherapeutic object dynamics. For our listeners, how can you break that down for us? And how did you get started in discovering what this theory is all about?
Sure. So, psychotherapeutic object dynamics looks specifically at the ways in which people engage with objects in ways that can be directly attributed to their well being and also to their healing when in times of need. And healing also, it's the kind of thing that I've discovered throughout the course of this research work, is something that we seem to be doing all the time, and sometimes in small ways, and then other times, of course, much more notable in the wake of tragedy or atrocity. So, how did I begin? I've been teaching for many years about objects in museums, objects in exhibitions, and how to use objects, how to explore them, and how to design with them and for them. And I've been able to take the research that is out there about how objects are evocative, how objects have all of these characteristics, and how we associate with them in different kinds of ways, all of which are a part of meaning making. All of which are a part of ways in which we form and can recognize emotional connections with content or even with our own lives and so on and so forth. And I have always been just so enamored with this aspect of my teaching. And yet, part of me was always feeling like I wasn't going quite deep enough and always wondering why? Why is it that people have all these connections with objects? Like, what is it? Why are they evocative? Why do they spur memory? For what purpose? And I could never find an answer to that. And back in 2013, I became familiar with an adolescent wilderness therapy facility and started to learn that young people, teenagers who were going to wilderness therapy were using objects found in nature as a part of their healing therapies. They were using sticks and stones and leaves and little plastic beads and were undergoing tremendous healing therapies. And intrigued, I got my way into a week in one of these facilities and was able to observe therapies, was able to participate with young people who were going into the wilderness and undergoing specific kinds of therapies with these sorts of objects. And I began to recognize after a while that we do things that all people seem to be doing similar kinds of things with objects on our own, even without therapists. And then the more I looked and the more that I learned, I began to realize people in museums have these same kinds of relationships with objects that I'm seeing in these healing therapies. And so that was the spark that led to the theory. And the thing to know is that in the course of the real directed research that I did over the course of 5 more years and working with different museums in several different countries and with many different types of people, I was able to identify 7 specific things
Mhm.
that people do. The first is giving and receiving.
Okay.
When we give a gift, when we receive a gift, when we give an object as a legacy or an inheritance or any other number, birthday gifts, right? Any kind of giving and receiving is an act of love. It is an act of appreciation. It is an act of recognition. It is an act of being seen and of seeing. The next one I call associating, and associating is when we keep an object close to us.
Mhm.
Maybe it's that wedding ring that we wear every day. Maybe it's an item of clothing that we wear. Maybe it's something that we keep in a box in the closet that we just need to know it's nearby. And it always moves with us wherever we move to throughout the course of years. And sometimes that means we visit an object at a museum over and over again. And we just like knowing that object is there. Releasing and unburdening is another dynamic. And that has to do with the action of removing something from your life. And maybe it's anything from spring cleaning, donating objects to a Goodwill. Maybe it's after a bad breakup. That ex partner, their stuff has just got to go. Synergizing is another one. That is a dynamic of donating, loaning objects to a collection. Maybe you collect objects on your own. There is something in the knowing that you are a part of a larger collective that is a synergistic experience that you are having. Touching is another dynamic action. There's actually brilliant research out there about what happens when people touch objects and about touching objects that are museum objects, quite specifically, and that can be directly related with health and healing. The last one I call composing. And composing is when you have two or more objects that have to be kept together.
Mhm.
It could be the pair of boots that a first responder donated to the 9/11 Memorial Museum, and under no circumstances can those two boots be separated because it is only together that they tell the right story. So that is the quick, fast journey through the psychotherapeutic object dynamics. It's automatic, it is inherent. It is a part of the dynamic of objects being a part of our lives every day, just as a part of being a person on this planet and being surrounded by objects and therefore knowing that we exist and that we're situated in a place at any given time.
You mentioned that there's objects that can be used as therapy. What kind of objects have you seen that are therapeutic for some
Mhm.
people?
Mhm. Like I said, it's in directed therapy. It's those sticks, stones, leaves, whatever it is that is on hand. Sometimes people, throughout the course of my research work, there are a lot of objects in museums that tend to have particularly evocative
Mhm.
value and that people tend to really relate to very deeply. And it's a lot of different kinds of things. First of all, I can give you a very general kind of category, which is clothing is very evocative. And I saw this at a study that I did with the museum at FIT, but also clothing at the War Childhood Museum. Hats, jackets, things that were worn by children during wartime. Very, very powerful, very, very evocative. I saw this at the 9/11 Memorial Museum, people relating to ordinary things, not even just items of clothing, but things like watches or teddy bears, like you mentioned yourself earlier on, and items that included things like ID badges or things that had been crushed, things that had been coated in dust, right? Things in ash, and objects that showed wear and tear of the event itself. Those are the kinds of objects that people responded to very, very powerfully and had a relationship with, or maybe identified with in specific kinds of ways.
I love how you're talking about clothing, most in part because it makes me think about van der Kolk, The Brain and Body Keep the Score, where
Mm,
there's a study that I saw from other grief scholars
mhm,
who indicate this idea that sometimes when survivors actually rewear a piece of clothing or an article that they had on during a tragedy, their body reacts to it. Like they might literally spawn a rash or some reaction of some kind from their body who's bringing them back to that time and that place. And I think
mhm,
clothing has that for us because it brings us back to a moment in time where we may
mhm,
have experienced trauma
mhm,
while wearing that article. And I remember in my own classroom as well, like my favorite time of the year were always the holidays. And when I say holidays, I mean any occasion worth celebrating. That's Halloween, that's Thanksgiving, that's Easter, right? Any time that there was a season coming up, because students would see that I would put up little things around the classroom, and then they would come in with their own things to contribute as well.
mhm,
And for Halloween, I had a bunch of students in my first year teaching give me like all these extra little pumpkins, like little plastic pumpkins that I can still hold on to. And
mhm,
same thing in December with holiday knickknacks and whatnot. And when it
mhm,
comes to these keepsakes, even though I haven't spoken to some of those students in almost 6 years, I
mhm.
still bring out their keepsakes every single year just to remember that one season we all got to share together.
Yes. Hey, you know what, Joey? I'm
Mhm.
gonna unpack that for you. Are you
Yeah,
ready?
please. That was my next question to help me unload that.
Sweet. Awesome. So here's what's going on. You have students who were giving objects to join in with yours. You were receiving them right
Mhm.
there, giving, receiving. You're recognizing them. You're saying yes to them. They're saying, I want to be a part. I want to be with you. I want to be with this. So that relationship there was a part of enhancing well being, possibly even a part of healing for some of the students involved. Then there was also the dynamic of synergizing,
Mhm.
right? Their objects were being a part of this larger collective whole that you were generating. All of you were synergizing together by creating this whole environment together of objects. So we had synergizing happening right there. You're experiencing associating, keeping these objects year after year, bringing them out, thinking about the students, reflecting on that giving, taking a look at the synergizing that occurred within this whole sort of decorative experience that you were creating with these objects. And again, the fact that you hang on to them, that's associating, affiliating and associating these objects with a specific holiday that you then are marking the year with,
Mhm.
and you are taking this composition of objects, this collection that you have created, and at this designated time, bringing them out. You are also experiencing the psychotherapeutic dynamic of composing. So you see, there's a whole lot happening if you use this particular framework. All of these specific things are a part of how you are experiencing your own well-being, and the students who participated likewise.
Absolutely. And I also think about other things I would just keep around my classroom for my own comfort. Admin used to say to me, put up more of their A papers and their work. And I'm like, well, they spend an hour a day in here. I spend 7. So I'm gonna decorate it with things, no, way more than 7, more like 10 or 12. So
For sure.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna put things in there that make me think about myself. Not to sound selfish, but it was my mentality. So
yeah.
I had a little tree in the corner here. I had a poem that I wrote on the side of my desk over there. And when I think about those things, just having all of those things in presence gave me comfort to teach in
Mhm.
that classroom. Because there, of course, does that mean that the government-funded classroom comes with the ceiling, the desk, and the floor. But with
Yes.
the teacher classroom, it's their energy that they propel into there to make it all come together to create some sort of space. I won't even say a healing space, but just make a space. And then
Mhm.
we can come in and say, like I used to call my classroom my Zen space. And the student's like, oh, cool, okay, this is a Zen space. And the mentality buys into them as well that, okay, with these objects, this is the space that he wants us to experience. And he wants it to be Zen. With the tree in the corner over there and the beanbag chairs beneath that, those objects send the message that this classroom used to be Zen and
Mhm.
healing. And I'm wondering, Brenda, what have educators learned from either museums or exhibits that when it comes to creating safe and reflective human-centered classrooms, what does that mean for us? Like, what's going on in our minds that you can help us unpack and explain when we want, as educators, to create those different classroom environments through the objects we put into it, like our Zen areas that some teachers coin it?
Mhm. I think that when we work with objects, such as what you're doing with the tree, with the beanbag chair, even with the poem that you have on display, we are and teachers who do and follow suit and do that kind of thing, and folks who frankly create exhibitions, for example, or work with objects in any number of ways within environments, we work with objects and their subjective associations when we are looking to elicit sharing, when we're looking to share personal perspectives, to add depth to the explorations of topics. And I think that really noticing that and being very aware of how it is that we're using objects to share ourselves, to share our perspectives, to add depth to the different kinds of ways in which we want to learn and grow within a space is definitely very important. And what's happening when you say Zen space, what I'm hearing is a space that is about sharing and about allowing people to have associations with objects in a very free form.
So what Brent is about to look at is a picture of my classroom from my first year of teaching. I call this the Zen area. What she notices is that there's a tree in the corner of the classroom. There is wallpaper in the background of it that's very deliberately made where I had a piano kind of background there. And that piano represents, in my eyes, the different keys, where there's white notes and darker notes that just kind of show that pattern of the human experience that my students could be walking through, and I explain that to them. There's a Charles Schultz Snoopy poster that says, keep looking up, that's the secret to life. Another poster that says, find your path. Another one with a butterfly that says, it doesn't get easier, you just get better. And a Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket poster that says, always let your conscience be your guide, all deliberately placed within the Zen area. Beneath that, there is also a applied suicide first aid badge and certificate that shows my training in that area, along with a sonnet that shows about the resiliency of overcoming grief and working to begin again that I wrote. This is after the Parkland shooting. So for an area like this, I was very, very partial towards this area in my classroom where
Mhm,
it was as much as I wanted to welcome students into it. And they definitely took advantage of it. I was also very cautious of it. They knew I had one rule in my class. I should have had more rules, but I only had one rule. The one rule was never, ever touch that tree for any reason. Do not touch
mhm,
the tree. You can sit next to it, but never touch it. And I guess what I'm thinking about is when we set these spaces up for students that help us just as much, by the way. I used to feel, I guess, in my own mind, I would tell myself I would feel better if I would step into the Zen zone and take a deep breath and then step out of it before my worst class would come in.
mhm,
I had to breathe in that spot. It couldn't be anywhere else in the room. It had to be in that corner where I took that deep breath. Then I would feel better, emotionally prepared for that class.
mhm.
And I guess my question is, with all the objects that we see in this space, does that actually work? Is it all in our heads, or is it true that those types of gestures help us find healing?
Oh, I would imagine very much so. I don't think it's funny, your question about it being all in your head. I mean, we are talking about a dynamic psychological theory
Sure.
here. So it is all in your head. And by the way, your head's a pretty important place. I think that there are probably a couple of things that are going on when you describe not just the design, the sort of the build out of your Zen area. First of all, there's the fact that you were taking an intentional pause, enabling yourself to reframe and get prepared for the next piece of work that you needed to attend to. But that pause is huge. That's really important. And as a tangent, every single class that I teach with my graduate students, so these are folks in their 20s, 30s, 40s, older, we always begin with a pause and a stretch every single class session. And at first, the students find it really kind of funny or weird, and then they really get into it. And by the time students have graduated from my program, they're like, hey, we forgot to stretch today. That's not cool. Let's do it now. It's a really great thing to take a pause and to make that a part of a transition. The second thing that I noticed was you've got an object from nature there, and folks who are experts in biophilia will talk about how it is that objects in nature as a part of designed environments are really essential to folks having experiences that are based in well-being. People, and this is part of wilderness therapy, going back to where we began.
So when our listeners start to prepare for their upcoming school year, as much as they don't want to
Mhm.
do that in the middle of the summer there, and when they start to think about different layouts for their classrooms, whether they're coming back to an old space and reworking some things or starting somewhere completely new, what are some ideas that they can carry into their classrooms as a way to design it to be both student and teacher friendly?
I think that having a combination of what you're doing, which is having maybe a couple of personal objects that tell the story of who you are on display is really, really important. Having an object or more from nature, and it doesn't even have to be a living thing. It can be, again, it can be beautiful stones that you've collected or seashells or whatever the case might be. It could be beautiful sticks and twigs and a branch from a tree, who knows? There's all kinds of beautiful things out there that can be brought into a classroom as objects of nature. And then I think that it's really interesting to offer to students to bring in an object that perhaps they have made or an object that is in some way important to them, and maybe having an exhibition area in the classroom. It can be a shelf, it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It'd be great if you had, like, a display case. And by the way, like, IKEA sells display cases that even can that are all glass that can be locked up. So, having a display case where students have little objects on display that tell a part of their story, of who they are, that would be very meaningful.
You reminded me of another little project I tried in that first year called the Nostalgia Wall Project. What I did is that in one corner of the room, I had a bunch of seasonal pictures, like from Halloween. It was like anywhere from my first Halloween to a Halloween when I was a little bit older, like in my late teens, early 20s. And I just had
Mm,
pictures from that October season that I would keep on my wall for October. And I would switch it for all the different seasons. And I invited students to also share their own pictures as well to be in that area. But the buy-in culture was very low as well.
mhm,
And same thing with the holidays. I asked students the one time they could actually really be in touch with that tree is that we almost turned it into like a little bit of a holiday tree. And the way I phrased it to them was that I said, every tree needs an angel on top during the holiday season. So I asked them to come in with pictures of those, anywhere from a pet to a person, of people that they could not share their holiday with because they were no longer there. And we would attach
mm,
those pictures onto the tree for that
mm,
month. And again, the buying culture was also very low. So,
mhm.
what are some ways, first of all, how can we explain why the buying culture could have been low? And what are some ways that other teachers who may want to try that increase the engagement from their students?
Yeah, I think that it's a triggering thing for students to really think about, for anybody to think about someone whom they've lost. So I think that from thinking about it as being a potential trigger, it could be something that folks just aren't ready to go to. You know, it takes a lot of healing, a lot of processing, growth to be able to connect with, to reflect upon, to meditate upon a loss. So I can imagine that it might have felt too personal, it might have felt too intimate for somebody to go there. And other students would have been ready, right? And therefore would have participated eagerly, really found it to be really meaningful in a very deep way. So I imagine people are at very different stages at any given time.
Right.
One thing that I would recommend is actually keeping things really vague and letting the students identify what is meaningful. So, for example, I do an exercise in my class with my students where I keep really open ended and really simple. And I say, bring in an object that is meaningful to you,
Hmm.
deeply meaningful. And that's all I say. And a lot of times people will bring in objects from their childhood. They will bring objects associated with a special day or a milestone. They will bring in an object that is something that was given to them by somebody who they lost. They will bring in objects that they made. They will bring in all kinds of objects that I always am surprised by. They'll bring in objects that are very humorous or objects that are very serious. And what we do is we then go around the room and the students share. And I give a lot of allowance. I'm like, you don't even have to share the meaning with the group if you need to pass. If it's too hard, if it's too emotional, that's cool. You can pass and we'll go on to the rest of the group. And almost always people want to share because they brought in the object and they really want to share it because it was their own choosing and their own decision about what was meaningful about it. And I get a lot of depth, and folks will, there will be tears sometimes and there will be laughter sometimes. But I find that by keeping things open ended like that and having the student define what meaningful is and what, where they want to come to that kind of conversation, they'll go there. And you will see participation, I think, on a higher level. And you'll get stuff that you wouldn't have expected. As an educator, and something to always bear in mind, have the students bring themselves to the topic, to the task at hand, and let them use their own agency when it comes to decision making in these kinds of situations that we create, that we set
Hmm.
up for them to engage. Let them determine what they're going to bring to it. And you will see students really step up.
I'm going to mention something that's very, very grim and dark for a moment.
Mhm.
After the tragedy, there were teacher friends of mine that had original things, like original diplomas and original trophies that they never got to see again
Mm.
because they were in the building that was massacred, and they
Mhm.
never got to go in and take those objects back because that building was eventually disintegrated. And I think one thing that I've learned is that our rooms should be filled with things that we love, but not the most personal things that we love that we would risk losing out on. And I think that's a good
Correct.
message for our students as well, to
Yeah.
bring your energy in, but bring in copies or even dummies of things that can be
Yeah,
duplicated at any time.
absolutely. I mean, your most cherished possession, bring in a photograph of it,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
right? And leave the real deal at home. That works too.
What have you also seen that students bring into a buy-in culture that works for them?
So many different things. I see students bring in a lot of things that for a 30-year-old would really surprise you. A toy. I
Mhm.
see a lot of toys. I see a lot of objects given from siblings or parents or dear friends that embody the relationship with a very important person in their life. I see a lot of that in those associations being drawn, the connections with another person.
Is there a question that I haven't asked you yet that we expected to talk about today, or any final thoughts for our listeners? And another question I'll ask is when it comes to what I call the secret sauce of education, what
Yeah.
would you say is like the secret sauce to the psychotherapeutic object dynamics that educators can think about going into their next school year?
Oh my goodness. I think in a way, what I already shared in terms of using objects to allow people to share, to offer their own perspectives, is really probably one of the best things that I say, keep in your head, keep in your mind as an activity that can be done. And if it's bringing in a photograph of an object that's too precious or too dear to be able to actually bring in itself, but having students create a display, have an exhibition, and again, maybe it is an exhibition of photos of an object that is very near and dear to you, creating an environment where the students are sharing those things and they're on display, or even if it is just a one day sharing kind of activity, having an object where a student is, again, giving definition to what they think meaningful is and how that works from their own perspective, the return on that is huge, really huge. Even if you're not seeing it, even if students are acting kind of like, yeah, well, I just did this because I was told to,
Yeah.
chances are there's something there that is really, really clicking for the student. And you will find a tone of sharing student to student, student to you, that will be really changed in a really positive way.
Hmm. And I think that students definitely engage in classes that invite them to do so
Yep.
so much more because now they're physically a part of it, not just
Mhm.
emotionally, but also physically a part of it. So,
Yes.
Professor Brenda Cowan, thank you so much again for sharing your thoughts and your insights on the power of stories, spaces, and the objects that we hold on to. This episode reminds us that healing isn't always loud, it's often quiet, subtle,
Mhm.
and found in the textures of our everyday lives. To our listeners, remember that the spaces you shape are stories in themselves, so let's keep building ones that make room for reflection, empathy, and growth. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.